I am SaydaHope, and today's video is going to be the second part of my interview with E.A. Wright. So grab a snack, plunk a seat on the couch, and enjoy! What is the title of your young adult? Do you have it figured out yet, or are you working on it? Are you ruminating on it?
Yes. So I initially called it, and this was like 7 or 8 years ago when I had just come up with an idea. I initially called it Rise from the Ruins,
Ooh.
which I loved. Then as it kind of progressed, I realized that as the first novel in a series, like it's already hopeful. You know what I mean? Like the first novel is usually like introduction to the scene, you know?
Okay.
And then novel 2 is now we're getting from point A to point B.
Uh-huh.
And then novel 3 is like here's the finale, here's the hope, here's the renewal of whatever
Gotcha.
right. Oh, by the way, we win in the end.
Yeah.
So I ended up calling it With Blood and Through Water.
Ooh, with blood and through water. That's really cool.
Yeah,
I like that.
thank you.
Oh, for cover art. Okay, so what did you have in mind for cover art? Have you gotten your cover art yet? Are you taking from royalty-free images? Are you going to have someone actually outsource to have it illustrated?
So I have a design background. So initially, before my life really began, I went to college and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I ended up getting a design degree. So I have a background and a degree in graphic design. So there's no reason for me, nor would I want to hire someone else. Like I know my story best. I have the capability to design my own book cover, and I know that, like, I've listened to a lot of podcasts that they're like, your time's better spent writing, like don't waste your time on your own book cover. But I'm like, but I love that part of it.
Yeah.
Well, there's just so many versions of the book cover, particularly in the fantasy world. So there's a slew of ways you could do a book cover.
Yes.
So there's really no wrong way to do it. And then you ask anybody in the fantasy world, they're like, yeah, the book cover's like important. It got me to pull it off the shelf. But if the bio is not intriguing, if the summary doesn't pull me in, I'm not going to buy this book. So it doesn't matter what it looks like.
When I was looking into making my cover, I remember watching some YouTube videos where it talks about the lettering has to be just so, and if it's this type of genre, it has to look like this. And I say just try to do it as true to how you feel it conveys the feeling
For sure.
and the sense of what the story is.
Yeah.
The same as anything else. The same as how you write a scene or something like that. It's that same type of thing. And it's funny how many things in my self-publishing journey, I just kind of was like, I'll listen to it, and then I was like, yep, in the trash. Okay, now back to my method here. So,
well, it's been very interesting listening to all of these other very successful authors, and they do have some very fair points. Like if I didn't have a design background and I knew I couldn't accomplish the vision I was looking for, like there are some really great book covers that have been made that you can go and get the rights to for like $100.
Yes,
like they're so cheap and easy.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I was looking that up, yes, there are quite a few websites where as you're in the process of making your cover, they can give you templates and be like, "Here, do you want to buy this?" That is so beneficial. There are so many outlets for self-published authors where if they feel they lack in one area, they can certainly make up for it over here. You know, it's wonderful, honestly. So the genre of it is a young adult fantasy. Alternate mythology, maybe, is how you...
Yeah, I'd say that. Definitely got a heavy emphasis in mythology, but it's not like Greek or Roman or Norse or any of those. It's like a made-up version of that. smattering.
So what about your story appeals to you? Why did you pick the fantasy route? And why did you pick the fantasy you did?
Totally. Valid question. I've always loved fantasy. It's my genre. Like, if I'm going to read it, it's fantasy. If it's, I mean, it could be any version too. I love urban fantasy. I love children's fantasy. I love all of it. It's just so great. Epic fantasy. You could just name it all. Um, I think the reason I love it so much is just because it's so inventive and like it takes the imagination on such a ride, you know? Um, and yeah, it's just so clever. Like a lot of the times I feel like, I don't know why, but the storylines and the plot that's in a fantasy story is like 10 times better than anything else you could possibly write.
I think when most people, especially people who aren't authors or aren't really writers or really lovers of fantasy genre, which honestly
Sure.
it'd probably be hard to find someone like that nowadays. But that said, I think a lot of those people who aren't on that train look at fantasy and they just expect, oh, you write about dragons. Or you write about something else that's extremely fantastical.
Yes.
When to me, some of my favorite stories of fantasy have actually been like World War II stories or something like that, where you're keeping it very grounded. You have very specific rules and guidelines you have to go through.
Absolutely.
Because you can't have it be too fantasy, but yet it's still a concept that would never happen.
Absolutely.
So, and honestly, I love that.
Yeah, urban fantasy is such a fantastic genre just because it has those, it has to have a familiarity, right?
Yes.
That we understand this world. We understand the use of cell phones, and it has TVs, and it's got all this like modern day stuff, or even if it's, in World War II, for instance, we would understand the context, but then you're just taking it like that little extra mile more and being like, but there's also vampires. When I think about Kenley, my main character, I think her initial, now that I'm thinking about it, her initial world, like that sense of like her nuclear family not necessarily being great, and that kind of like propelling her into this other world, and being very accepting of this other, family. I think that stems from a lot of real life. I mean, I have a wonderful family life. Like, I love my parents and I've been very fortunate in that regard, but I know that a lot of people don't. Like, they're not close with their family, and it's actually very unusual to find a family that genuinely enjoys each other nowadays. And so I think that stemmed just from normal society. But then from there, the characters kind of developed in like, well, she didn't really have a great father figure, so I wanted to implement a good father figure. And then she didn't really have a lot of close friends because she was, always working and didn't have time for those relationships. And so I wanted to implement her seeing those really good friendships and those really great, and like seeing really good examples. So I wanted to be very clear that she didn't have a great example. I want her to see good examples, but also for that relationship between those two to be very clear that they're not infallible. Like, there isn't just an ideal that's happening here. Like, they're very real people, and they're going to have their own struggles and their own doubts, but there's something very strong about that as well.
I actually really like that, because like the fact that she comes from a background that is not so great, I like it that you didn't compensate it with a perfect person to to take that place. I like that you still put, faults in there. That's really good.
Thank you.
Something that I've always kind of found interesting for myself is I'm an only child. My mother was an only child, and it's really just the two of us. The only family that I really count as having does not even live in the same state. And so it's interesting sometimes to even write something so simple as a family dynamic for a character if you've never really experienced that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny too, because like my part-time job that I have, I get along with so many people out there, and in many ways it's kind of like I'm siblings with a lot of the people out there,
Yeah.
and I've known them for years, and we kind of
Yeah.
treat each other like siblings.
Yeah.
And that it's almost like, oh, so that's how that would go, and that's how so and so would talk to so and so. Yeah, it is kind of cool where you draw on things from life.
Yeah.
But
well, and
yeah.
then that's another important thing, is that there actually is a very important piece to all of humanity, and like who we are as people and how we interact with others in that chosen family over just the actual nuclear biological family.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many facets of humanity that come out in literature, and that I think we all want to pull from in order to make really dynamic characters. And that's really the only way to do it, is to know that, like, oh yeah, beyond the nuclear family, there is a really important aspect of the chosen family, of like who we choose to allow to be the people that we go to, who are our, our confidants and our the people we really love. And it may not be a biological person. It may be someone else. And there's just as much strength in that. She was transported to Adstrom, which is like my, Valhalla, or it's my heaven, where the
Elysian Fields, I believe, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, Elysium, like where the gods live and reside. And so the although I don't think in Norse mythology it is Valhalla. I think that's where they go when they die.
Yeah, so is the Elysian Fields. So I might have been misunderstanding you.
Okay. So no, this would be like the Olympus, or
okay.
Midgard? No, that's the name for Earth. What's the one for
hold on. There's Midgard, then there's Asgard.
There you go.
Yeah, and that's the realm of the gods.
Right. The realm of the gods live, right? Where they live.
Yeah.
So she actually goes to Adstrom, where they live, and she has an encounter with like her lineage's kind of like beginning.
Oh,
so
cool.
With those two gods, power of the gods kind of entering her, that is kind of has forced this sort of change. And so it's not just an inner change, it's also a physical change. You may see stereotypical roles, like that is a totally fine thing. Everybody loves a good, something we're familiar with. Mm-hmm. But I think we will see a lot more of that in literature, of just like people, or the characters that are written are just unapologetically them. Like they are whatever they are, and they own that. And that's like the best. I actually think that's one of the best things, especially in YA, that we can teach these young kids, is like, just be who you are, love who you are, and like, just own that.
Yeah.
The whole like seeing more, people of color, and seeing more, LGBTQA plus. That it's like this. We want to see representation, because that is what the world is.
Yeah, and the thing also too about it is that it'd be nice to see it like illustrated in a way where it's not a token. You know what I mean? Where it's actually just, this is just society. This is just a story about society. We're not trying to say anything with it.
For sure.
We don't need it to represent anything, because in the end, this is just how it is. So just let it be. You know?
This is just the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny too, because like my other character, my female lead who's in the book that I released, the Das Hers story that's out now, I was just kind of thinking something that is kind of funny about her is that she's supposed to be an attractive woman, but at the same time, she has such a way about her that's very devilish, and she's also just kind of rough and tumble, that I was going to say she could have a huge chunk of piece of straw in her hair through the whole story, and it not affect how she come off at all.
That's awesome.
So that kind of thing, that's just fun to see just with a character in general, let alone it be a woman. So
well, and that actually brought up a really good point, is that it's like some of these characters, it's really interesting, like from a writer's perspective. Like, I don't know many people that sit down and are like, okay, I'm gonna like envision this character and I'm gonna know all of their personality facets and I'm gonna know everything about them. I feel like most of my characters just sort of developed on their own, and then like they are who they are, and like I have no real control over it. With my fantasy novel, With Blood and Through Water, I think I initially, when it came to world building, I started very, very small. With my main character, Kenley, and then her world of like her village, her house, her family unit, like what does that look like?
More personal things.
Right, personal, very, very close connection things. And then as I grew out from there, like, right, the world just keeps getting bigger. And then at some point I was like, okay, now we are moving locations, we're moving far locations, so I need to make a map. So then I sat down and I kind of, I think I initially started with, I took the coastlines of a bunch of different places, like real life coastlines, like from Africa and from South America and from Asia. And I just like mashed them all together and created like my little island, which ended up being very, very large. It became so big.
What is it you enjoy most about world building? Is it like the environments? Is it the landscape? I have down here, is it the re-envisioning of technology or civilization?
Well, initially it started with this idea of mythology. So that's where it started. And then the idea of creating your own mythos. So I think that really pulled me in and got me invested, because I was like, well, what if I just, did this? And what if I had a god do that? And like, that's interesting the way that works, and interesting. I just got really invested in my map, oddly enough. Like I got so it got so fun. So like I really had a lot of fun creating there's this one city that's on top of this really like really sky high plateau that like nobody has ever been able to access, and it feels very like Vatican to me. I think of the way I describe them is that the people that are from there that went out into the world like back in the day because they had sealed themselves off and nobody had ever really heard of them, that's like current day, they were kind of like missionaries, but at the same time they were also like law enforcement. Like they kind of would go around and like perpetuate the sense of like this is right and this is wrong, and they were kind of like lawyer, judge, executioner. Like they just kind of did the whole thing. And then, all of this stuff happens, of course, and they seal themselves off, and nobody has seen or heard of these things in like 100 years, right? And so I had a lot of fun building this extra different kind of world within the world, right? So it's kind of almost like taking the primary world that they're in and moving them to a secondary world without really moving to a secondary world. And I thought that was really fun to do. That's so then as I've gone through it, and it just kind of keeps building on top of itself, it gets like very rabbit hole-y almost, like where following it
in. That's good. I like that though. And I suppose like Vatican City, that's a very good example too. I love the idea that it's actually like a plateau, because it that harkens to the Mount Olympus vibe. Yes. But yet at the same time, it's something more that can be described like the Vatican, where it's just a little bit more society based. Yeah. Let's say that's very cool.
I'm very into it, obviously.
would you have any advice?
With anything that's creative and that you have a passion for, I think it has merit, and that you shouldn't just set it aside. I think you should devote time and energy to it, because I think even if nothing like comes of it for anyone, you know, like even though this is something I've newly discovered and I'm kind of coming into, and I would love to be like a really desired author, and you know, I mean, careers only go so far. Eventually I'm going to retire, and then I'll have plenty of time to do everything.
There
so
you go.
I'll just keep writing forever. I mean, that's like one of the cool things about creativity, and like having that inner drive to just kind of keep using it. That like it's important, and we shouldn't just like set it off to the side and be like, oh, I'll think about it later, like when I, you know, am not working anymore. Or I mean, this could be anything. I mean, I think travel is even a good example. You know, like don't wait until you're, you know, 60 to go do these things and have these goals and aspirations and desires to see the world, or to write that book, or, you know, see that movie. You know, I mean, like, go, just do it. I think it's important.
Well, I have certainly enjoyed our discussion tonight.
Yes.
Well, I hope you have enjoyed it as well.
Oh, this has been so fun. I mean, who doesn't love talking about the things that you just nerd out on, and you like can keep talking about it? I mean, I think we all love that.
Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for being part of this collaboration, for being this guest on my channel.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be here.
I'd like to give another special thanks to EA for joining. I wish you all the best for your publishing. And as for this episode, it's concluded. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. We want to meet everybody where we're at and understand that we are not... That was a really weird sound. That was my phone.
I was like,
I got a text from a friend, and that's my leftover from Halloween.